is a small but very unique population in Georgia that unfortunately, due to such significant mental health and substance abuse issues, is that they take up a significant amount of the resources of the state. And constantly we see them basically going between healthcare, the jail or prison system, homelessness. And then you can almost take that triangle and just either go clockwise or counterclockwise.
Concerns over Georgia's mental health system continue, and a bipartisan effort in the House looks to continue the reforms the chamber spearheaded last year. Good evening and welcome to Lawmakers on day 21 of the Georgia legislative session. I'm Donna Lowry in Atlanta. If you felt helpless and frustrated when you've tried to get tickets to your favorite concert or sporting event, there's proposed legislation to give you more power when you're buying tickets. One of the sponsors of the bipartisan legislation joins the show. And both Democrats and Republicans have bills this session surrounding public safety issues. Among them is the Transparency in Policing Act. Another is called Back the Blue. Sponsors of each of those bills join us in the studio. But first, let's get to the day's news from our Capitol correspondent, Rochelle Ritchie. Rochelle?
Well, hi, Donna. A very productive day in the House as 10 bills passed, and in the Senate, a very unusual request. Today, House members joined to recognize the life and legacy of 39th U.S. President Jimmy Carter, whose family recently announced his admittance into hospice care.
We are all keeping him and his family in our prayers. President and Mrs. Carter are woven into the fabric of our community.
Speaker Burns was also honored with a token of appreciation, a nameplate from Georgia Marble, a company that has been in business since the 1850s.
That's what it looks like right there. So
that is beautiful. I'm humbled to accept it. And if you don't mind, just do your best to get it in my office. I don't know if I...
Sadly, Representative Tremaine Reese stood today to recognize the 5 lives lost in Columbus, Georgia, following a violent weekend.
17 people were shot, including a 5-year-old who will permanently lose an eye. 5 people died, including a 15-year-old and a father and son in the same location.
A moment of silence was held to remember those who died. In legislative news, House Bill 279 will allow for property owners to receive a discount for building new properties that are constructed to withstand tornadoes, hurricanes, or other catastrophic wind events. But some members showed concern that property owners not receiving discounts would see increased cost in their premiums.
Are there any protections from them bearing the brunt of the discounts offered to those who do?
I'm not exactly sure that I necessarily agree that that would happen, but that is not addressed in this legislation.
The bill passed 172-1. House Bill 80 passed unanimously and will now allow for those overseas to provide written statements without being notarized under a penalty of perjury.
The document has to be in a certain form where there's a notice above the signature saying that you're signing it under penalty of perjury.
Following the adjournment of the House, Speaker Burns made a new announcement regarding mental health legislation, an issue that was near and dear to former Speaker David Ralston.
Our mental health service delivery system was underfunded and not designed for the needs of a growing, thriving state.
The bipartisan legislation will continue to support the efforts for expanded mental health services and data availability.
The inability of agencies to share data with each other in terms of the care for not just minors but also adults is absolutely something that we need to focus on, and we're going to focus on how it is that we can do that within the federal and the state construct.
And the Senate started the morning with tributes to Jimmy Carter also. Senator Freddie Powell Sims spoke about her most famous constituent.
We are deeply saddened by the news of President Carter's hospice announcement. He is a role model, a leader, a trailblazer, and an unmistakable gentleman with loads of strength.
Senator Russ Goodman spoke about the influence Carter had on himself and his sons.
You know, President Carter's life, and that's one of the reasons I carried my boys there. Both of them are farm boys from South Georgia, just like Jimmy Carter. And Jimmy Carter's life proves that in this country, you can be a farm boy from South Georgia and become the leader of the free world. And I am so thankful to him for his legacy and his life and what that means to kids like my sons and what they can accomplish in this country.
Followed by a prayer for the former Georgia State Representative, Governor, and U.S. President.
And let's take a moment and stand and let's just get a moment of silence. Let's keep put our prayers up for the Carter family and President Carter himself.
Then on to the rules calendar. Senate Bill 22 will regulate the growing industry of edible hemp products in Georgia.
The FDA has recently sent a number of warning letters due to safety issues for these products, especially for children who are attracted by products like gummies that are labeled to look just like products that they may be very attracted to, and they often mimic popular brands.
The bill would also restrict the age of those who could buy those products.
This bill applies testing and labeling standards and an age restriction for hemp products with a THC content of less than 0.3%, such as Delta 8. It also provides for licensing and permitting fees, background checks for growers and distributors, and it provides penalties for sales to individuals under 21 years of age.
After 4 amendments were added, the bill passed 29 to 26, but a reconsideration vote was asked for when questions about how the bill would legally treat Delta 8 came up. The bill was eventually tabled and sent back to the Rules Committee. And Senate Bill 61, that bill would remove the sunset provision on a law allowing sick leave for family member care, such as kids, elderly parents, and special needs relatives.
And that is my Capitol Report. Donna, back to you.
Thank you, Rochelle. We're going to spend time now focusing on a couple of different public safety bills. Joining me are Republican State Senator Larry Walker III of Perry. He's chair of the Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor. And Democratic Representative Tanya Miller of Atlanta, a new representative now in her 21st day in the General Assembly. Welcome to you both, to Lawmakers. You have a history of watching your dad be on this show.
Yes, ma'am. About 50 years of watching Lawmakers. So
yeah, Larry Walker
Thank you for having
Jr.
me, Donna.
Thank you so much for coming on. So let's start with you. Tell us about Senate Bill 110, the Back the Blue bill.
I'm glad to talk to you about it. This was originally a bill last year that then Senator Burt Jones introduced, and it passed out of the Senate Insurance Committee. It didn't ever make it to the floor of the Senate, but I thought it had merit. And of course now Senator Jones is now our Lieutenant Governor, and he's fully supportive of this. But it attempts to provide some additional funds for our sheriffs. You know, our sheriffs are constitutional officers. Each 159 counties have a sheriff. They're our chief law enforcement officer in the county, and they're the number one person in the county that's supposed to keep our citizens safe. And I hear from my constituents, the number one issue I hear from them is concern about crime. And the sheriffs and their deputies are on the front line of this. So Senate Bill 110 is a optional donation on your auto insurance bill of $3 to go to support our sheriffs and sheriff deputies and jailers.
So it's just the $3, and you're hoping a lot of people will get involved with it.
Yes, ma'am, and it's totally voluntary. It won't be, you know, increase your premium. It's just an optional donation.
Yeah, let's talk about the fact that the insurance company will make sure it goes where exactly so that it gets to the officers.
Senate Bill 110, if it passes, it requires the state insurance commissioner to set up a Back the Blue fund and to prescribe a manner in which this checkoff, is what I like to call it, will be on everybody's auto insurance bill to voluntarily donate the $3. The insurance companies will collect the money, and then annually they will remit it to the insurance commissioner, and he will disperse it to the county sheriffs. And the bill calls for this not to supplant any funding that the county has given to the sheriffs. It's supposed to be in addition to, and it's specifically for compensation of officers, whether they're jail officers or sheriff deputies, and benefits.
Okay, I will talk to you more about that in a moment. We're going to talk about a totally different bill with Representative Miller. Your bill, HB 325, the Transparency in Policing Act, which deals with establishing guidelines for police body cameras.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
Thanks for having me, Donna, and thanks for asking about this bill. HB 325 is a bill that's co-sponsored by myself, a former prosecutor, Representative Scott Holcomb, also a former prosecutor, and Representative Yasmin Neal, a former police officer. The bill would simply require uniformed officers to wear a body camera every time they interact with the public. It's sort of a universal body camera bill. The bill would also require that officers who intentionally tamper with, destroy, or interfere with the recording of that video be potentially charged with a crime. And it does also require that certain notification provisions be enforced when a citizen's loved one is killed and it is depicted on video, that video would have to be shown to the family within 24 hours. Of course, this bill is not the first bill in the House. We have been talking about transparency in policing for some years now. I think it becomes more evident to us when we see instances in the public space where unfortunate use of force incidents happen and there is no body camera footage. I think that creates a lot of mistrust between law enforcement and the community, which we hope this bill, if it is passed, will help us to mend that. We know that when law enforcement does not have the badge of legitimacy with the public, when the public does not believe that law enforcement is there treating those communities with dignity, it makes us all less safe. It makes law enforcement officers less safe, and of course it makes our communities less safe.
I'm curious, has there been regulation over body cameras up until now? Is there a law dealing with it, or we hear about local jurisdictions, but statewide?
Right, no, there isn't, short answer. All law enforcement agencies right now are sort of, free to use body cameras or not use body cameras. We don't have a clear sense of how many law enforcement agencies do not have body camera policies. We know that in most of the metro departments there is some form of body camera policy. We would hope that this bill would require all local law enforcement agencies to have body camera policies in place and usage in place. And the hope would be that we would find a way to fund this purchase for law enforcement. These body cameras protect police officers just as much as they protect citizens. There's so much technology that can be leveraged in the community. Most of the body camera footage, to be quite frank, is utilized by prosecutors against suspects because it will often depict sort of what happens during an arrest. So there really is no good reason not to do it. I think that if our communities, law enforcement, want to make sure that we sort of re-establish trust in communities where trust has been broken and build trust in communities where trust has never been, we have got to start showing people that we're serious about transparency, and that's what this bill would do.
You brought up the idea of money, and that's one of the reasons, especially with the smaller jurisdictions, being able to afford this kind of thing. It can be expensive.
It can be expensive, but this is what I say to that. We have a $6 billion surplus in our budget. I do not understand why we would not, in a bipartisan sort of way, want to use some of that money to assist smaller jurisdictions who will need help funding a body camera implementation. But also, Donna, the feds offer significant grants to law enforcement agencies. And in fact, that application process is going to start really soon, where they will give financial support to law enforcement agencies who do not have the finances to implement these policies, because it is so important to policing not only in the state of Georgia but nationwide.
And the only other thing I wanted to ask you about is the state troopers. We just recently learned that they don't necessarily have the body cameras, and that would be something the state would have to finance.
That is correct, Donna. And we learned that, some of us know that who have worked in the criminal justice space. The state troopers often interact with citizens in front of their vehicles, so they have utilized and relied on dash camera footage. But as we saw in the Cop City, I hate to use that that expression, but the Cop City incident, we had troopers who were not fitted with body cameras, and unfortunately there is no footage of the shooting that happened, and it has left some questions in certain segments of our community that I think could easily be answered if every police officer interacting with a citizen has a body camera.
Okay, so we'll see how that bill goes. I want to get back to you on yours. I'm curious, has any other state done anything like this where through insurance, they're providing money for law enforcement?
Don, I'm not aware of that, and I'd like to say we're leading on this. I'm sad to tell you, though, however, we're not leading on law enforcement compensation in Georgia. I think your viewers would be surprised to know that the average, based on a 2021 survey, compensation survey by the Georgia Sheriff's Association, the average salary for a sheriff deputy in 21 was $38,421. The average salary for a jail officer was $32,280. We have some sheriff deputies making as little as $13 an hour, some jailers making as little as $10 an hour. A sheriff deputy in Georgia, sadly, many of our sheriff deputies qualify for SNAP, which is what we used to call food stamps, and we've got to do better. Now, this is just a small step to hopefully provide some resources to better compensate our sheriff deputies. The sheriffs have to run our jails, protect the court, serve all the court papers, do mental health transports, fight gang activity, do traffic stops. I mean, they're on the front line, and we've got to do better with our compensation.
There's no way of knowing how much money may come in at $3 a pop.
I've thought about that, and I'm going to find out how many auto insurance, this is just on auto insurance, how many auto insurance policies we have in Georgia. I suspect it's $1.5 million to $2 million. And if everybody did it, of course, you'd be looking at $4.5 to $6 million.
Well, we'll see. We'll get the word out on both of your bills. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll talk about a bill aimed at breaking up what some call a monopoly by the companies that sell tickets online to your favorite concerts.
Lawmakers is made possible by Georgia Farm Bureau. With over 80 years of helping everyone understand the importance of agriculture in our state. After all, ag is Georgia's #1 industry. Food and fiber production represents over $74 billion in output of Georgia's strong economy. The Georgia Farm Bureau legislative team works to represent producers across Georgia at the state capitol during the session and year-round. Georgia Farm Bureau, the voice of Georgia farmers.
Here's what's new this month with Passport.
Kirsten had a lot of courage. She fought for Black culture.
They could have killed you. You're exactly what we need right now. Oh my God.
What is this?
She was poisoned.
These and all your favorite shows are available with Passport. Support your PBS station and stream more with Passport on the PBS app.
We care about things that affect the lives of every American.
We are there at the front line
to get to the heart of what really matters in every issue.
This country has not seen this in 80 years.
This extraordinary moment in American history.
You're making such a huge impact.
Trust is at the heart of what we do.
One of the easiest ways to support GPB is to become a monthly GPB sustainer. Your monthly support continues automatically month after month and supports not only the great programming that you love on GPB, but also our efforts in the community. GPB is committed to provide a trusted space for lifelong learning on the air, digitally and in person all across Georgia. All this is made possible with your monthly support. And we can't do it without you, so please donate right now at gpb.org/give. And thanks.
Welcome back to Lawmakers. I'm Donna Lowry. You've heard the names Ticketmaster, StubHub, Ticket Smarter, the Seat Geek. They're the sites where you might buy concert tickets. In Washington, lawmakers are looking at legislation such as the BOSS Act to provide transparency and regulation in the online ticketing industry. Georgia's also looking at ways to help consumers. And joining me is the sponsor of one of the bills, Democratic Senator Josh McLaurin of Sandy Springs. Welcome once again to Lawmakers.
Thank you.
We talk about that. You're co-sponsor on a bipartisan bill,
That's right.
SB 183, which looks at ticket brokers and restrictions to selling tickets. So tell us about what appealed to you with this legislation.
Sure. Well, you know, I think over the last few months, you've seen consumers, concert goers all across the country up in arms over the way that Ticketmaster has handled the ticketing process for several concerts. I mean, I think we've all either got stories ourselves or we have friends who have stories about just how frustrating that process is. And I've personally participated in one of these processes. Not only do you not know if you're going to get a ticket, but once you see a ticket available and there's dynamic pricing in some cases, that price can go up before your eyes, right? And that's a problem with the primary ticketing process. What this bill does is what we can do as state lawmakers to take a bite out of Ticketmaster's monopoly. At the federal level, just for context, the fight for antitrust enforcement or trying to make sure that Live Nation and Ticketmaster, who merged years ago, don't have too much of the market, that fight is for Congress, right? And that's the big monopoly fight that voters and consumers are most concerned about. But at the state level, there's some things we can do. And Ticketmaster typically has between 2 or 3 rank, so second or third, in terms of ticket resale share of the market nationally. So that means not only are they having the monopoly for venues and primary ticketing, but then in terms of resale, secondary ticketing, they're really high up on that list as well. And so what this bill does is it returns power to the consumer to make choices about their ticket, that you don't have to use Ticketmaster's own proprietary platform to buy and resell and pay them fees, right? So essentially, you can use any means you want to transfer the ticket under this bill. Now, this bill is a tricky balance because the music industry is not just like any selling widgets, on an open marketplace. There are artists who do want the fan experience to be protected. They want to maintain goodwill and a good relationship with their fans. And so part of what we have to figure out as we negotiate the final stages of this bill is in returning power to the consumer, how do we balance that with artists' ability to keep prices low to make sure that their real fans are coming to concerts? And that's something that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, so let's get into that a little bit more. The Senate Committee on Economic Development and Tourism, and I believe you're on that committee, or did you attend the hearing?
Yes,
right. They had a hearing recently, and among those opposed to the legislation are concert promoters like Live Nation, which owns Ticketmaster, and promoter Peter Conlon with Live Nation Atlanta spoke against the bill on behalf of artists.
These people surreptitiously get tickets by using bots, which are illegal federally. They're the reason a lot of your constituents or yourself can't get tickets because they clog the system. I had a show I put on sale last week with 12,000 tickets. It sold out. 4,000 went to bots. They then resell these for a high price. We don't set the ticket price. The artist does. The artist wants to make their tickets available to all their fans at a reasonable price. They know they could get these same exorbitant prices if they wanted to, but they don't want to gouge their fans.
Yeah. So your reaction to what he says, especially with these bots, something out there that's actually grabbing these tickets before fans can get to them.
Right, and this goes back again to the balance between state issues on the one hand and federal issues on the other, and sort of playing in multiple arenas at the same time. There's already a federal law that prohibits anybody from using bots to buy up tickets in that fashion. And so one of the issues is really enforcement, making sure that if there's somebody using bots that they get shut down. That's not necessarily something that the state legislature is in a great position to fix, but it does help provide context for our policy discussion because it explains why we're in this frustrating situation to begin with.
Yeah, I know the Ticketmaster on the federal level apologized to Taylor Swift and her fans, and that's how this got a lot of attention. But this whole idea that somebody else could sell them again, how is that different from how these bots work with this legislation you're talking about?
Right. So, the point that Live Nation and Ticketmaster are trying to make, and, they know that they're not very popular right now, so they're reaching for the arguments that they can. But their argument is essentially, look, we've got this proprietary technology that we can use to restrict resale transfer writ large. And, we promise you that we're going to use that power to protect artists, to protect against gouging. They say that. But the issue is that right now, under the Georgia law, Ticketmaster has basically unfettered discretion to impose whatever restrictions it wants, regardless of what the artist wants, right? So in some ways, some of the artists are held captive. They're in a position where they're forced to use the Ticketmaster platform, right, because of their overall monopoly, if they want to put reasonable, common sense controls on price or that sort of thing for fans. So what Ticketmaster and Live Nation are doing right now is hiding behind artists to try to basically use the artist's desire to maintain goodwill with fans to say, you need us to do that. And the reason you're seeing bipartisan support on this bill is we just don't believe that you have to use Ticketmaster to maintain that relationship. We think there are other ways that the market can support artists interacting with fans in a way to maintain goodwill other than being stuck in that one proprietary platform.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who will be paying attention to that bill, and because it's bipartisan, you feel pretty good about it going somewhere.
Well, it definitely makes the mood lighter in committee. I mean, I think one of the great things about when you find a really good bipartisan issue where both parties can work together, you see collaboration between legislators that is so unlike what we see on TV with the big floor debates on contentious culture war issues. It's quite nice. And, you know, seeing those Republican legislators every day, you get an appreciation for what it means to really work with them and be on the same team sometimes.
Yeah, on the team of the people. So I want to have a few minutes. Let's change gears to a couple of your other bills. Both deal with elections. Tell us about SB 179, which would permit the re-registration of people purged from voting lists and more.
Right, and so this has to do with people convicted of felonies. You know, a lot of times we've got these laws on the books that have been around forever. We don't question where they came from. We just adopt some sort of, you know, common perspective that, oh, that's just the way things are, right? And in this case, that's people who are convicted of felonies not being able to vote during their felony sentences. Well, as in my view, and in the view of a lot of my peers, just because you're convicted of a felony doesn't mean that you're not a citizen anymore. And one of the most important aspects of citizenship is the right to vote. Now, some people might say, well, they're convicted of a crime, so, you know, that's just part of the punishment. But that's rationalization of a policy that has racist roots. So in the late 1800s, after the Civil War, states who were faced with black voters newly having the franchise started disenfranchising black voters deliberately and using felony convictions as the way to do it. Not just southern states, not just slave states. You had New York that did something similar. This is just a kind of an unfortunate thread in America's history. And so these disenfranchisement laws persisted for over 100 years. And to this day, they obviously catch quite a bunch of people in their net. But I think we have an obligation to remember where those laws came from and to consider whether they serve us anymore. I think in this case, you'll find that it's not about moral blame. It's about practicality. If you're inside one of Georgia state prisons, which, by the way, have in recent years suffered one of the most severe humanitarian crises this state has seen, you know, people who are facing risk of murder and assault and all kinds of evils, inadequate nutrition, mold, you know, disease-oriented conditions. These sorts of conditions don't get fixed if nobody's listening. And the way that politicians listen and care, unfortunately, is sometimes if they are required to care by the fact that those are voters who can vote for the candidate that's going to pay the most attention to them. So I think, you know, sometimes people have this cartoonish objection to felony reenfranchisement that is, well, they'll just vote against public safety, or they'll vote for more crime. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think people who have made mistakes are still people. They are suffering from really inhumane conditions in our prisons, and even though I know the new commissioner is working on that, what I would really like to do is say, let's recognize your citizenship. Let's recognize that you're a member of our society, even though you made a mistake and are paying the price for it. And let's give you the ability to petition your elected officials for changes in your conditions.
So who would this affect? It's not everybody who comes out of prison.
So it's actually anybody convicted of a felony. Okay. And there are already 2 states that already do this, Maine and Vermont, which basically says that when you get a felony conviction, you just don't lose your franchise at all. And again, if anybody is queasy about that, I understand where people are coming from, but I really invite people to look at the history of this, which is why I raised it, and to ask the question, you know, who does this really serve, and wouldn't we be better off if those people had a real voice in their representation?
Okay, I'm going to mention real quickly, running out of time, Senate Resolution 148 would just take it in front of the voters because it would be a constitutional amendment.
That's exactly right. And I think that's one critical popular check on this. You know, sometimes we have opinions as elected officials, but the important thing to do is to kick it back to the people and say, you know, we have an idea about this, but you guys confirm it for us.
All right, we'll find out more about that. But that's, thank you for coming on Lawmakers, and that's all we have time for today. We'll be back tomorrow for Legislative Day 22. Good night.